Hello everyone, welcome to the chapter 16 video for our instrument ground school. In this video I wanted to talk a little bit about flight planning when it comes to instrument flights. Now of course Rod has a lot of good tips in the chapter, and as always you should be reading that. What I wanted to do here is kind of walk you through a flight plan for a flight to an airport that's not super close, but not super far away. And so the airport that I picked is the Burke Lakefront Airport in Cleveland. So I've started by going to SkyVector. Now, of course, you might use your software instead. I'm using SkyVector because it's easy to do here online and make this video. But I go to SkyVector and I click on World Low instead of, you're probably used to looking at this, World VFR. And this will give me somewhat of an idea, what the deal is with my route. Am I going over things like water, et cetera, et cetera. So a little bit about this airport. Why did I pick it? It's very close to the Cleveland airport. It is right on the water. It's a nice little airport. They have a pretty good museum there for women in aviation and in space. It's a free museum. So if you're, let's say going to Oshkosh or something like that on your way, you might think about stopping over there. It's a nice little airport. It's kind of unique in that they built this airport and they thought, hey, let's have airline service out of this airport and supplement what's in Cleveland. And that pretty much went away for whatever reason. So they've got a lot of large and mostly empty buildings there now. A couple of flight schools and such. But yeah, it's kind of a nice little airport to fly to. It's just a little over 2 hours if you're flying in a Skyhawk. If you're flying in something faster, of course, it'd be less than that. But, by the way, speaking of, if you were to fly to Oshkosh, you could stop along the way at this free museum. Another place I would recommend is a little bit further this way. If you go to Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is up here, you will find that it's going to also have a pretty cool museum, which isn't free, but if you're an EAA member, it is, and that's the Air Zoo. So a pretty cool place to go. All right, so step one, we figured out where we're going, just like VFR. Step two, let's figure out a routing. So we know there are no instrument departures from Bloomsburg, but you might ask yourself, are there any instrument arrivals into our destination, BKL? So how could I figure that out? Well, I've pulled up BKL here on AirNav. So here's a sectional excerpt. You can see it's right on the water. By the way, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is right next to it, as is a pretty nice science museum, which is normally not free. But again, if you're an EAA member, it's free to you. So, if you're heading out that way and you want to make sort of a slow trip of it, I guess, you could do that. I was out there early in 2020 before all the COVID craziness. In fact, it was like right before they shut down our part of the state that I was out there and visited some of these places. Okay. If I scroll down, I'm going to notice that there are, in fact, several STAR, standard terminal arrivals. Now, if you look at these, you'll see that they're also associated with Cleveland. So this is something you should be aware of. Doesn't really pertain to us here in Bloomsburg, but if you're flying to a big city and you're going to a satellite airport for a big place like Atlanta, you might also be asked to use the stars, unless, of course, you do no SID, no star in your routing and when you file your instrument flight plan. All right, so you can look here and you can say, all right, well, which of these stars would likely pertain to me? I don't even know. There's a few of them. Well, here's how you could know which one might pertain to you. I can look up the standard routes or preferred routes to this airport in what? Well, it used to be the airport facilities directory. In fact, if you go to your book, it's still going to talk about the AFD. But you don't want that because they don't make it anymore. Now they make the chart supplements. That's what they call this. So I'm going to look at the chart supplements that cover Wilkes-Barre and just want to look and say, does this have a preferred route to Cleveland? Now, if you look at this, which I'll go ahead and do now, let's go ahead and go back. And I'm going to see if it puts me right back where I was. And it didn't, of course. So I'm going to search on the page. I'm going to hit Control F. I'm going to search for preferred IFR routes. And that will bring me quite far down in this document. And from here, I could scroll down until I found Wilkes-Barre. But guess what? You're not going to find Wilkes-Barre. But I will find New York. So I'm going to look at New York and say, if I'm going from New York to Cleveland, is there any preferred route? And here from Newark, it says blah, 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 Cleveland. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Tri-B Star. So in other words, if I am coming from this general direction, the star is Tri-B. So that tells me when I go back here and I'm looking at all of these different options, I can say, oh, well, it must be the Tri-B 4 that I want to look at. Let's at least start there. All right, so here's the Tri-B 4. Now this one is sort of on its side, and it's named for the Tri-B intersection, which is right here. I shouldn't say intersection, actually it's a waypoint. It's not based off of VORs. That's why this says RNAV. And you'll notice it says landing KBKL and these other places, then you're pretty much going to go this way. So how are you going to fly this? You're going to come in and you're going to go to Tri-B and then to Nagy and then from there to Tunes and then to your destination. So when I file my route, I could file to some sort of intermediate fix, because let's face it, if I say, hey, I'm just going to go straight there, they're probably going to say, no, you're not. I mean, I could try it. I could say direct and then use this Tri-B star. If if I look at the next page, it says landing all these places from Tri-B, track 275 to cross Nagy at or above 7,000, then track 324 to cross Tunes at 6,000, then on track 320, expect radar vectors to final approach course. So this is the instructions for this star. Back to my sky vector, let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit. Now you'll notice that I'm going to almost fly down Victor 232. So that's something else to notice. Again, you could try just to go with a direct, or you could say you want to go to maybe Watso direct from there. It's kind of up to you. And you'll just see what they get. You know, you might get cleared as filed, except for go direct to this intersection, then direct, blah, 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 blah. All right, so that's kind of the routing. And I'll go ahead and put in Watso. And to Watso, I'm going to add this star. Now, I don't believe that they have stars built into Sky Vector. So we're just going to go ahead and do this instead. We're going to say Tri-B, Nagy, Tunes. Tri-B, Nagy. And again, we're just getting a general idea of how we might go. So speaking of flying to somewhere like Oshkosh, you would probably want to change your routing because you probably don't want to fly over two lakes in order to get to Oshkosh unless you have flotation gear and a lot of confidence in your single engine, assuming you're flying a single engine plane. Okay, so looks like the routing is kind of figured out. Then we can start thinking about things like our altitude. If I look along my route here, I'll notice that the MEA is 4,700 on this Victor Airway. The altitude for this sector is 5,400. Remember, that's different from VFR, where VFR charts will tell you, hey, this is where you're going to hit something. This is giving me clearance so I don't hit anything at 5,400. Going west, so maybe an altitude like 6,000 would be appropriate. Say 6,000, perhaps 8,000. What would determine the difference between using 6,000 and 8,000? Well, is there any freezing? Are there clouds? Yes, you're instrument rated, but does that mean you want to fly in the clouds constantly? You know, tends to be bumpy if you do that. And of course, you know, depending on the weather conditions, you could have chance of things like icing. You know, if it's cold, it's wintertime. So, yeah, we've got maybe 6,000 or 8,000. Those are good altitudes in terms of efficiency when you look at your non-turbocharged, or what they call normally aspirated piston single. You're going to get your best performance in that range. If you are flying, let's say, a turbocharged aircraft, now you're starting to get the best performance in that 12 to 15,000 foot range, which is also where you have to start thinking about things such as oxygen. So we'll go ahead and let's have a quick look at the weather. Now, I'm just going to look at the METARs and TAFs because, number one, we're not actually going to make this flight, but it does bring up some questions. So currently at BKL, the winds are slightly gusty, a few clouds at 5,000. Cleveland, winds are a little bit less because it's not on the lake. Some really high clouds. What's the forecast say? So the forecast is telling me that later they're looking at scattered 5,000, broken 20,000. All right, so this is looking pretty good. I can look at some other places along my way, and of course, if I was going to make this flight, I should get a full weather brief, either electronically or by actually calling somebody. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Now a question, what about an alternate? Do I need to file an alternate? Well, I don't need to. In this case, the weather is well within my 1, 2, 3 rule, right? Within an hour before or after my arrival time, the weather has to be better than 2,000 foot ceilings and 3 miles visibility, which it is. And it's not forecast to be worse than that until tomorrow sometime, like tomorrow morning. The clouds are supposed to come down, and then they're forecasting broken 2,000. So even though I don't have to file an alternate, I can still file one. And Cleveland would, of course, be a good alternate to file. It's pretty close. They have all kinds of approaches into there. Okay, so let's go back to AirNav. And let's ask ourselves, what kind of approaches do I have available to me at this airport? And you'll notice there's 2 approaches, and they're both to the same runway. Runway 24 right. So there's an ILS, and then there's a GPS. So let's go ahead and look at the ILS. We can go ahead and look at all the details of this. Notice that this ILS actually has a procedure turn for a reversal. We were looking around trying to find something like that locally, but that's what they have here. But for our planning purposes, I think the biggest thing we want to ask ourselves is, how low can I get with this ILS? And the answer is 334 feet in the air. So it's not the best that I can hope for from an ILS, but it's not too bad. So if I were going to file this flight plan, I could file something like November 13, direct Watso, then direct to BKL via the Tri-B 4 star. So I could say Tri-B 4, and that would pretty much get me there. 6,000 or 8,000 feet, really depending mostly on what is going on with the winds. So if I get more of a tailwind, I'm going to go up to 8,000 feet. Otherwise, I'll just stick with 6. Now, of course, how would I actually do this? I would either electronically or via calling flight service, file my instrument flight plan, and then I would be at Bloomsburg. I would call up the number, call Wilkes-Barre, tell them I'm ready at the end, get my clearance. They're going to give me my clearance. I'm going to take off. I'm going to fly it. And after that, it's pretty easy. One thing you can say about flying IFR, it is way easier to fly IFR than VFR, right? You only need really one frequency, and that's the first frequency. And you already know that one's 120.95. So You get that first frequency, you're going to talk to Wilkes-Barre, then eventually they'll probably turn you over to New York, and you'll notice that New York is going to be a 124.9. You could even have that in your standby as you're flying along. And then they're probably going to switch you over to 134.8. And then once you cross this border here, they're going to switch you over to Cleveland. If you look around, you can probably find a frequency. You know, here's one that you might be on, 126.725. Again, you can put these things in your standby, but that doesn't mean that that's the exact frequency they're going to give you. But if you're bored and you got nothing else to do, then you're going to talk to Cleveland on 120.6. And then as you get a little closer, they're probably going to change you to some other frequencies. So here's Cleveland approach. And then there's the tower, etc., etc. Okay, so that's real quickly how you could plan an instrument flight. Now, one thing I should probably bring up, if you look at the flight plans that are in the book, those are the old school flight plans, not the ICAO flight plans. So there are some slight differences, but I know that most of you are going to use your software to file that flight plan anyway. So it's really not going to make that much of a difference to you. The routings are all the same. The routing doesn't change just because it's one format or the other. What changes is primarily things like equipment codes for your aircraft. Okay, well, I will see you guys in our next video. That's all for now.